I just pan fried some chicken, but how do I turn what's left in the pan into a restaurant quality pan sauce? It's easier than you think. We're going to season the chicken with salt and pepper. Now do that on both sides. That really is all the seasoning that's needed and I won't hear any different. Cold stainless steel pan. Now I don't use any oil, but you can use a tiny little bit if you like. We're going to pop the chicken in the pan skin side down. Now as the pan warms up and they cook gently, the fat will render and they'll brown as they release from the pan. You've just got to be patient. And I'll put them in an oven at 200 degrees Celsius for about 5 or 6 minutes until they reach the low 60s. On this occasion I went a little over to 74, but that's perfectly fine. They'll be nice and juicy still. Little tip, you might want to leave a tea towel on the handle to remind you it's hot. Now you can also pop these into an oven at 50 or 60 Celsius to keep them warm whilst you make the sauce. We've got all this lovely chicken fat and flavour in the pan now, so we'll slice some mushrooms and go in with those. Now if you don't get a lot of fat, you can top it up with some olive oil. We're going to get a nice bit of colour on these on a medium heat, and then a moment ago I finely diced some shallots. So we'll add those. Now the shallots won't overwhelm the chicken's natural flavours. When they get translucent, grate in some garlic and cook for about another 2 minutes before deglazing that pan with some dry white wine. If you don't want to use alcohol, you can go straight to the next step, which is to add chicken stock, which will also deglaze the pan. Then we'll reduce that aggressively, and you want to have it look like this so that your spatula traces through. And then we're going to finish with some lemon juice, follow that up with some herbs for freshness. I'm using tarragon and chives, which is a new favourite. And then after turning the heat off, I'm going to add a tiny amount of butter for a little extra glossiness on that sauce. Now you could also substitute that butter with creme fraiche if you wanted to make a creamy sauce, which would be absolutely lovely. Now earlier I made some buttery garlic mash. Here's how I made it. I use baking potatoes for mash because they're floury. These have been baked for an hour and I'm going to pass them through a tammy sieve whilst they're still warm. Baking them like this means that you don't get too much moisture in the potato. Now you can push them through a regular sieve or not do it at all and use a ricer, but you won't get it quite as smooth. I take an unusual amount of pride in my mash, so I use a 40 mesh sieve. Now the number refers to the holes per inch, so the higher the number, the smaller the holes. Any higher than 40 is too small and becomes difficult to work with. 40 I found is the sweet spot. I'll get that potato into my saucier pan on a low heat and I start adding in butter. I just eyeball it and look for the consistency I'm after. Now, just going back a step, when I baked my potatoes, I cut some garlic in half and I added some olive oil and salt. I wrapped it in foil and I threw it in with the potatoes. That means I can turn this into a beautiful garlic mash by passing it through the mesh too. A little more butter for this batch and I'm seasoning with salt all the way through to taste. Next, I've warmed some milk. I'll add that until I get the consistency I'm after. And if you want to make perfect quenelles, wrap your spoon in cling film. To plate, I'm going with the sauce on the plate, followed up with one of those chicken breasts to keep the skin nice and crispy. The mash goes on. I've cooked up some simple tender stem broccoli to go on there as well. I've put the full recipe in the description for you, and if you want to know the pans I use, I've put links to those in my bio. That's a dinner, all right.